Thank you. And we can just remind ourselves that we're coming together to think about, to interact, to gain the path of reasoning, as it's called, of Tibetan debate from the Nalanda tradition. And that the reason we want to do this is so that we can use it as a tool to increase our clarity, increase our understanding, both in terms of how things actually exist, what is real, and also in terms of how things work, so that we can identify correctly the tools that will best help ourselves and help other sentient beings. The ultimate purpose of decreasing suffering and increasing happiness everywhere. So with that intention, for that reason, we can settle in and do everything we do today. Okay, so let me start as usual by asking if you guys have had a chance to practice together or on your own. Yeah, okay, nice, good. I'm glad. And so let me turn it to you. Let me ask if you have any questions. I can hear you. I'm just going to grab some water, but if you have a question, please, you can start shouting it out.
I've got one.
Sure.
What's the symbolism or the why behind the clapping and the mala beads?
That is an excellent question. And 1 second. There are lots of different theories, but I'll tell you my favorite one. My favorite theory is that it's very cold in Tibet. And so they found that if they kind of go like this, they kind of help keep their hands warm. Honest, that's one of the big theories. In India, I'm told they, before debate came to Tibet, when it was still in India, they didn't used to clap, they used to snap their fingers. So they say blah blah blah, it follows blah 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 blah, However, whether this was the intention all along or whether this is kind of like an extra mind training practice that's come on top of it, there are several symbolic meanings that are read into it. I'm trying to remember what they are. I remember that when you're debating and you're standing up, when you clap, you also stomp your foot on the ground. And the idea is that you can imagine that you're closing the trap door into the lower realms for the other person. You're protecting them from falling through the hole. Clapping is bringing together wisdom and method, also compassion and wisdom. I know there's that. In Dan Perdue's book, I know he talks a little bit more about some of the possible symbolisms. Yeah.
And the mala, I noticed like in some of the movies, the mala is like a big accessory.
Right, it's true. I don't remember. I have to tell you honestly, I don't remember. I know. I don't remember if I'm completely making this up or if I've read this somewhere, but I know I think of it sometimes almost like as a slingshot to like fling the reason at the person. And Namala is mantras. It's it's a reminder of practice. So I'm sure that must be part of it too. Anything else? Does it feel like it's coming along? Is it starting to make a little bit more sense, to click a little bit more? Does it still feel like a jungle?
I found that the practice sessions have been very helpful to I'm not saying I feel like I've made a lot of progress, but it definitely helps keep it in your head. And this is certainly a good thing.
I'm so glad. That's great. Great, great, great. Okay, so why don't we do something similar to what we did last time? Why don't we try to model a debate together? And then after that, we can go into breakout rooms so you guys can have a little bit more of a chance to practice. They can check in with each group. I mean, I can see two possibilities here. We could either do it again where I'd be happy to have a debate with somebody, or if any two people would like to volunteer to give it a go, we could try that too. Okay, I think I need to ask a more directed question. Let me start with this. Is there anybody who'd be willing to volunteer to, in essence, ask a question about something in Buddhism, but to do it by using the debate format? Because if you think about it, in a sense, that's what debate is, right? Or it's one thing it can be. It's like you're asking, as the defender, you're asking a question and the other person, instead of answering you, is showing you.
I have a question, but I don't want to be stuck answering it.
Oh no, it's neither or both. Well, you made the mistake of opening your mouth. So what is your question, Jen?
Well, Andrew and I discussed like pain, and also I did it with somebody else, maybe with Theo or somebody, pain and suffering and happiness versus suffering. So pick any of those pairs if you want.
Like how do they compare, you mean? Like that?
Yeah, how to compare, yeah.
Sure. You said we can either do pain and suffering on the one hand or happiness and suffering on the other hand. Is that what you?
Yeah, but you kind of, yeah. I mean, they're related.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's give this a try. Would anybody else like to volunteer to debate this with Jana? Going once, going twice. So, okay. So, all right. So, the subject, just as Manjushri debated. Jana, take the subject, the two, suffering and happiness. It follows that you cannot tell me how they compare.
Why?
It follows that you can't tell me how they compare.
What do I say? I accept.
Accept. Pause it. How do they compare?
How do the two compare? Well, whatever is happiness is not suffering, and whatever is suffering is not happiness. So they're mutually exclusive.
Okay, it follows that they are mutually exclusive.
I accept.
It follows that they are not mutually exclusive. I'm just teasing, okay? It follows that whatever is happiness is necessarily not suffering.
I accept.
Take the subject, happiness experienced in samsara. It follows that it is not happiness because it is suffering. You have accepted the pervasion.
I accept.
Take the subject, happiness experienced in samsara. It follows that it is happiness because it is happiness experienced in samsara.
Why?
I gave you a reason, so you.
Oh, so that say the reason is not established.
Okay, interesting. Take the subject, happiness experienced in samsara. It follows that it is not happiness experienced in samsara.
So it is not. I accept.
It is not happiness experienced in samsara. Okay, so just to spell it out, take the subject, happiness experienced in samsara. It follows that it is not that it is not happiness experienced in samsara because
Happiness experienced in samsara is actually suffering. It's in the nature of suffering.
Because of being in the nature of suffering. Take the subject, happiness experienced in samsara. It follows that it is in the nature of suffering.
I accept.
It is in the nature of suffering because
Because compounded phenomena are in the nature of suffering.
So because of being a compounded phenomenon, you mean?
Because of being a compounded phenomenon, that's it.
Okay, okay. So subject
wait a
happiness,
minute.
experience,
No,
and
that's
so subject happiness, experience, and samsara. It follows that it is a compounded phenomenon.
I accept.
It follows that whatever is a compounded phenomenon necessarily is in the nature of suffering.
Why?
It follows that it is not the case that whatever is a compounded phenomenon is necessarily in the nature of suffering.
I accept.
It follows that there is an example of something that is a compounded phenomenon, but not in the nature of suffering.
I accept.
Posit.
The realization of emptiness in the meditative state.
Realization of emptiness in the meditative state. Take the subject, the realization of emptiness in the meditative state. It follows that it is a compounded phenomenon.
I accept.
It is a compounded phenomenon because
it is impermanent. Because it's momentary.
Because it is momentary. Take the subject, the realization of emptiness in the meditative state. It follows that it is momentary.
I accept.
It follows that it is not momentary because it lasts more than a moment.
Why?
Because it lasts more than a moment. You mean the reason it's not established?
No, because the reason is not established. Yes.
It follows that it does not last more than a moment.
I accept.
It follows that take the subject, someone who has the experience of the realization of emptiness in the meditative state. It follows that they do not have the experience of the realization of emptiness in the meditative state for more than a moment.
I accept.
It follows that in the next, the subject, that being, it follows that in the next moment, they no longer have the realization of emptiness in the meditative state.
Can I clarify? Or I just have to do this? Okay, I accept. Say that again?
Follows that in the next moment, they don't have the realization of emptiness in the meditative state.
I accept.
It follows that in the next moment, either they no longer have the realization of emptiness, or they are not in the meditative state anymore.
So I have to ask which,
You
they're
have
not,
to either
they're
accept.
not in the meditative state. What do I say?
So you would say, I accept.
I accept.
Okay, so now I can ask you, which is it?
Okay.
So which is it?
They're not in the meditative state anymore.
Okay. The subject, a person having the realization of emptiness in the meditative state, it follows that in the next moment, they are not in the meditative state anymore.
I accept.
Take the subject.
Can I clarify?
You can't technically, but let's do it just for the sake of time.
Well, if you talked about just the path of seeing as opposed to the subsequent paths.
So take the subject, the path of seeing. It follows that it only lasts a single moment.
I accept.
It follows that it does not only last a single moment because it lasts as many moments as it takes to what's the word I'm looking for? To cause the cessation of all of the doctrinal wrong views.
That I don't know. Why?
Well, okay, that's as far as I can take that personally, so I'm going to stop that there. Okay, let's pause here for a second to give folks a chance to make comments or ask questions. Please, Jana, yes.
No, I said, thank goodness. I said,
Oh, thank goodness. Me too. Any thoughts, questions, anything that stood out or that you don't understand or?
So I always get confused when the person accepts, knowing where to go from there, because it seems like you've reached an agreement.
Right. No, that's a very good question. So if I fling a consequence and the other person accepts, there's a few things that could be going on. One possibility is that I'm setting a trap, you know? So for example, when I said to Jana, the subject, a person who's having a realization of emptiness, if all of a sudden in the next moment, they're no longer having a realization of emptiness, that is a trap, because that did seem to follow from what she was saying. And I don't think that's correct. So if she accepts, then I can show her what I believe to be the absurd consequences of that. You see? So that's one possible way that it could go. Another is that it could just be really assessing and checking to make sure that she really means what she said, right? In fact, that is what you should do as a debater. So if, like, let's say when I asked Jana, is the happiness experience in samsara, I said it follows that it is not, well, let me actually see, let me even think about it.
It is not.
Well, sure. Yeah, sure. When I said, well, actually, okay, let me actually go to this one. I think it's easier. The happiness experience in samsara, it follows that it is suffering. And Jenna accepted, right? Now, see, now I can clarify more. Because now she's officially said, yes, the happiness experience in samsara is suffering. She's accepted that. So now I can say, okay, it is suffering because, right? And then she had to give me a reason. And she gave me the reason because of being a compounded phenomenon, which is incorrect, and she knows it. And so, but now I need to check that she's committed to that reason, right? Because she actually noticed the mistake before I even asked anything, but sometimes she wouldn't notice the mistake until I, so I said, so mind you, what she said, she gave me the syllogism, she committed to the syllogism. The happiness experience in samsara is suffering because of being a compounded phenomenon. The syllogism implies three things. It implies that the happiness experience in samsara is a compounded phenomenon. It implies that whatever is a compounded phenomenon necessarily is suffering, right? And it implies that the happiness experience in samsara is suffering. So I want to make sure that she accepts all of this. She already accepted the last one. She already accepted that the happiness experience in samsara is suffering, because that's how I drew the syllogism out of her in the first place. So there's two more things that I want to make sure she accepts. So what I would say, and I hope it's what I said, was, okay, then take the subject, the happiness experience in samsara. If I did say it, it follows that it is a compounded phenomenon, right? And so she had to accept that, because that's, otherwise the reason she gave would be completely meaningless. Say, okay, so you accept that? Okay, then it follows also that whatever is a compounded phenomenon is necessarily suffering, right? And for her reason to stand, she would need to accept that. I didn't say that very clearly. Let me try it this way. Hold on.
You didn't accept it.
What's that?
I didn't.
You didn't accept it, but I know you did. I know you did. And I had pity, and I didn't saw you, and I just kind of kept taking it forward instead of bringing it back to say, haha. So, 1 second. Okay, so when somebody, this is a syllogism, this doesn't say it follows that, right? So this is a syllogism. So if somebody says this or somebody accepts this, I forgot to write the words, the subject, but the subject A, it is B because it is C, right? They are committing to three things. They are committing to A is C. They're committing to whatever is C necessarily is B. And they're committing to A is B. Right? So if I ask, if somebody has accepted that A is B, they've accepted that. And now I want to understand why they think this. So I say, okay, the subject A, it is B because, and they say, because it is C, right? Before, all they had committed to was that A is B. Now they've further committed to A is C, and whatever is C is necessarily B. They've committed to that implicitly, and I just want to draw that out explicitly. So I'm going to say, okay, then take the subject A, it follows that it is C. I accept. Follows that whatever is C is necessarily B. I accept. What happens if they don't accept it? What happens is that technically I can go back and say, okay, then it follows that this isn't a valid reason anymore. This isn't a valid syllogism anymore. And then they have to accept. If they say, no, it is not true that whatever is C is necessarily is B, then I could say, take the subject C, it follows that it is not a good reason for proving that A is B after all. Why? Because there's no pervasion between C and B. When I say this out loud, I hear myself saying it, and it sounds so much more complicated than it is. I have to tell you, I have to admit, really.
I think it's easier with Snoopy is a dog, is a mammal because it is a dog.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, in fact, and the subject Snoopy is in this room. So Snoopy, it is.
I haven't met Snoopy. Please bring Snoopy.
What's that?
Please introduce us to Snoopy.
I really want to. The problem is that my camera doesn't point down, and Snoopy doesn't point up. But one of these days I'll find a way. Let me just think about. Oh, you can hear the subject. Okay. Suppose that somebody says, suppose I say, take the subject Snoopy. It follows that it is a mammal. The person says, I accept, right? Then I'll say, the subject Snoopy, it is a mammal because, now let's say that the person says, because it is a sentient being. Okay? Now, think about all that they've just committed to. They've committed to Snoopy as an animal, but they don't, a mammal rather, they'd already committed to that. But now they've also committed to Snoopy is a sentient being, and they've committed to whatever is a sentient being is necessarily a mammal. Well, that's not true. It is not true that whatever is a sentient being is necessarily a mammal, because the subject of fish is a sentient being, but it is not a mammal, right? So I'm going to get it out of them explicitly, and I'm going to say, okay, follows that the subject Snoopy is a sentient being, and they'll say, I accept. And then I'll say, it follows that whatever is a sentient being is necessarily a mammal, right? And if they accept, then I'll show them why they're wrong. But if they realize, oh crap, no, I didn't mean to say that, right? Then they'll say why, right? So when I say take this, it follows that whatever is a sentient being is necessarily a mammal, they'll say why. And then I'll say, it follows that it is not true that whatever is a sentient being is necessarily a mammal. I'll say, I accept, right? And if I really want to rub it in, I'll say, it follows that there is no pervasion between being a sentient being and being a mammal. And they'll say, I accept. And I'll say, it follows that the subject being a mammal is not a valid reason for proving that Snoopy is a mammal. I'm sorry, follows the subject being a sentient being, sorry, it's confusing enough without me making mistakes, follows that the subject being a sentient being is not a valid reason for proving that Snoopy is a mammal. And they have to accept. Why? If they say why, I'll say because there's no pervasion between being a sentient being and being a mammal. You've just accepted that reason. Can we illustrate this? Let's illustrate this. Jenna, do you get what I'm spelling out right now?
Yeah, I understand.
Can we just do a role play real quick? Would you mind? Like, let me say, so give me that incorrect reason when I ask for it, that because of being a sentient being, okay? Take the subject Snoopy. It follows that it is a mammal.
Accept.
It follows that it is a mammal because, it is a mammal because
Because it is a sentient being.
So take the subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a sentient being.
I accept.
It follows that whatever is a sentient being is necessarily a mammal. Say why.
Why?
It follows that whatever is a sentient being is not necessarily a mammal.
I accept.
It follows that take the subject being a mammal, it follows that it is not a valid reason for proving that something is a sentient being.
I accept.
It follows that, take the subject being a mammal, it follows that it is not a valid reason for proving that Snoopy is a sentient being.
I accept.
So now what I've done is I've kind of obliterated that line of proof. So now what I can do is I can go back. So let's try it again. Take the subject Snoopy. It follows that it is a mammal. I'm checking to see, do you still believe it, even though that reason doesn't fly? Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for a different reason then. The subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a mammal because.
The dog.
There you go. And that's a valid reason. But I'll still check it. I'll still say, take the subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a dog.
I accept.
It follows that whatever is a dog necessarily is a mammal.
I accept.
Boom. That's a solid reason. You see? Now, if we were debating and I wanted to, I could still try to, throw her off by coming up with like, take the subject, the stuffed animal dog. It follows that it is a mammal because it is a dog. That's trickery, but just to check her understanding. But she did give me now a solid reason. Yes, Linda.
First of all, I have innumerable questions, but the ones I can put into words are much fewer.
Yes.
So I have a question about the pervasion. I kind of understand it when I can see the subject, the, I guess, predicate and the reason and the arrows. But the word predicate brings back the times when we were doing the 4P and 3P, I mean, not predicate, pervasion. And seems like there's all sorts of different ways that could go. So it seems like this is a very specific use of the term pervasion relating the reason and the predicate.
Good question. I think the last chapter that we had assigned together before we decided to go our separate ways from the book touched this. If not, it was the next one. He says there's only two types of correct reason or something like that. So first of all, it's the same pervasion. It's not a different use of the term. What it is that there's two ways that there can be pervasion from B to A, that B can pervade A. One way is if A is completely included inside B. The other way is if A and B are congruent, or whatever you'd call it.
Mutually inclusive, yeah.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay,
so this is what we would call mutually inclusive. This is what we would call three possibilities. Right? So if there's three possibilities between A and B, such that whatever is A is necessarily B, but whatever is B is not necessarily A, which is this, right? Then it's still true that there is pervasion between A and B, from B to A, that B pervades A. And if they're mutually inclusive, then also there is pervasion, that B pervades A. In this case, A also pervades B.
Okay, so it's two of the 4 or 6 things in chapter forms in chapter.
It's two of the 4 or 4 of the 6. If you're counting only 4, there's 2. If you're counting 6, there's 4. Okay,
we'll just stick with 2. And it also helps with me picture what the word pervades means.
Exactly.
In this context. Thanks.
Exactly. Yes.
So that's B pervades A, but A does not pervade B in the first one.
So B, exactly. So here B pervades A and A pervades B. Here B pervades A, but A does not pervade B. That's exactly right. Now, I'll say this, again, Daniel Perdue, he introduces the types of pervasion first. And then when he explains syllogisms and consequences, he says that these are the ways in which pervasion ties in. For what it's worth, on a practical level, I personally at least find it a lot easier to just think, you know, is it true that whatever is that reason necessarily is that predicate? Equivalently, is it true that there's nothing, there's no exception, there's nothing that is that reason, but isn't that predicate? Because if there is even one thing that is that reason, but isn't that predicate, then that reason doesn't prove anything.
Will you say that negative form again?
Say that again.
Is it true that there isn't even one thing that is that reason, but isn't that predicate? I'll give you an example. Take the subject, the youngest one of the 7 dwarfs. I don't know, as far as I know, their ages were not stated, so I don't know who that is, right? But take the subject, the youngest one of the 7 dwarfs in the Disney movie. It follows that his name ends in Y because of being one of the 7 dwarfs.
First of all, they're non-existent.
Let's leave that aside for a second, but you're absolutely right. But Brett, you have
Isn't one of them named Doc?
one of them is named Doc. One of them is named Doc. And one of them is named Bashful. I know because it was once a trivia question that I had to answer and I couldn't think of it. And what are the only 2 dwarfs whose names don't end in Y? So you see, so on that basis, the fact that it's one of the 7 dwarfs doesn't prove that its name ends in Y. There is an exception, right? So because again, take the subject, the youngest of the 7 dwarfs, the fact that it's a dwarf doesn't prove that its name ends in Y. It could be that Doc is the youngest, it could be that Bashful is the youngest. So there's no pervasion, so therefore the reason doesn't work. Now, on the other hand, take the subject, the day of the week when I was born. Okay, you don't know what it was. It follows that in English, it ends in a Y because of being a day of the week. That works because there are no exceptions. If it was a Sunday, it works. If it was a Monday, if it was a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, it ended in a Y, right? So that one works. Why? Because there's pervasion. If it's one of the days of the week, then it ends in Y in English. See, now you don't have to, you don't even have to worry about, is there pervasion both ways? There's not. It is not true that if it ends in Y in English, then it's necessarily one of the days of the week, but that doesn't matter, right? For example, sleepy is one of the dwarfs. It's a word in English, it ends in Y, but it's not one of the days of the week, right? So, but the question is there an exception? Is there anything that is a day of the week that doesn't end in Y in English? If so, then what he just said is no proof. But if not, then what he said is proof. Okay. Yes, Andrew.
Is there anything in any of the monasteries over, say, the last X hundred or thousands of years, probably hundreds of years, where using this logic as discovered, I'm going to really badly phrase my question, but like, actually taking these pervasions and how this applies, is there anything that in the monastery they've said, well, actually, oh, sugar, we did think that, but now debate has uncovered that it's the opposite? Or
Yes.
is this just being done for our own understanding and making sure that we understand. My question might not be making sense, but
no. I think there's lots of that. I think it's been smoothed over by the winds of the centuries, meaning what we inherit is it's almost like survival of the fittest. We only inherit what has survived as part of the tradition, you know. But so I'm not aware of like when we learn the tenets, you know, like let's call it, it's not the same as a doctrine, let's just say the doctrines, we are given the reasons, you know, but we're not necessarily told historically, like this is the moment when this reason was realized or recognized or something like that in most cases. But there's definitely it's interesting. I never thought about the question just the way you said it. It makes me kind of realize or kind of intuit that in Tibet they think about it differently than we do, I think. I'm kind of just getting the flavor of that as I'm thinking about your question. Like, I don't think it seems to me that it wouldn't occur to them to say like, oh, Einstein discovered this, let's memorialize that in the books. It's more about just like, this is the fact, you know. Thank you for explaining to me, you know, this is the fact. I don't know. Maybe I should stop talking because I'm speculating. But definitely like the way that we know the hierarchy of the tenet systems, the way that we know that Vaibhashika is not as sophisticated as Sautrantika, and Sautrantika is not as sophisticated as Chittamatra, and Chittamatra is not as sophisticated as Madhyamika, and within Madhyamika, Prasangika is the highest, is entirely because of this, 100% because of this, you know.
That helps. I guess where I was also thinking is like, because Jana and I remember the conversation around suffering and happiness or suffering and pain. I can't remember exactly what it was, but just as you were talking through pervasion, then I was thinking, well, actually, surely other people in the monasteries, some geshes, have already debated that exact thing. So can't we just go to their answer? And
oh, yes, but that's the point. You don't want to do that. That's exactly the point, right? That's what so that's more of like a Western approach to some extent. Like in the West, Western logic is designed to be efficient. You know, it's designed to, like, it's almost like you plug something in over here and it spits something out over there. And there might be things in the middle that can't even necessarily be interpreted, but it's just logical consequences. But this system is designed to not do that. It's designed to make us work for every step so that it's very clear to us at every step what's going on. Because the point here isn't simply to arrive at the truth. I mean, that's a necessary component of what we're trying to do, but it's not enough. But it's for us to truly understand, for us to know what we know and why we know it and what we don't know and so forth. That's why in the West, we've developed symbolic logic, you know, and you can do all sorts of, like, you know, if you wanted to say, like in the West, we could write it like this, right? Now, before I tell you what this means, in Western logic, we can know that this is valid. This is a valid syllogism in Western logic. We have no conclude what it even means. We can tell just from the shapes, right? Now, what this means, and this could mean any number of things, but what I mean for this to mean is, for all X, if X is a dog, then X is a mammal. Snoopy is a dog, therefore Snoopy is a mammal, right? But in Tibetan logic, this wouldn't fly. You couldn't say this is correct. You'd say, I don't even know what you're talking about. right? Tibetan logic in one sense is a little bit more rigorous. Like it takes more for us to be able to say that is perfect, that goes, than in the West. Sorry, I just went off on a tangent, I realized. All of that is to say that to go to the book to look up the answer would entirely defeat the purpose. And often, sorry, the subject Snoopy is wanting to get at, and often, go for it, buddy. Often, the Tibetan style is when we ask a question. Sometimes we won't just get an answer, like a pre-digested answer. Sometimes we'll either get a consequence or something surprising or another question or something like that. Why? Because, you know, the point is for us to figure out for ourselves. I'll give you one really cool example of this. I remember one time, Geshe Tsolga, I can't remember the Geshe's name, but there was this Geshe, and somebody in the audience was asking him a question, and they said something like, blah, 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 something like the self doesn't exist. And they had a question, a sincere question, and Geshe Tsoga said, or the Geshe said, if the self doesn't exist, then who's asking the question? And the person said, nobody. And he said, oh, if nobody's asking, then I don't need to answer. And then he moved on to the next question. And that was the end of that. Right? And it was so, I found it so interesting. I found it so interesting because that person is going to go home and think about it and think about what just went wrong. Right? And they're inevitably going to understand something different. Okay. Anybody else before we move into breakout rooms, or anything else that would be helpful before we move into breakout rooms? Yeah, please, Linda.
One other question. I think something I've noticed for myself is that when we're practicing, I think the defender and challenger roles can get confused. I mean, when you're debating with one of us, you're very clear as a challenger what you may say next may not be clear, but I think you're clear about your options. And then I think a couple rounds into it, I start getting confused. I don't even know if this is a question about, I think there's accept or why, and then there's reason is not established. There's no pervasion. But then at some point it seems to all get a little mingled.
Yes. Let me try something. Let me see if this might help a little. Come on, computer. Help us out. Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Just see how I can do this. I can still see you guys clearly. Now, this is a document that I came up with myself to help me understand this stuff a few years back. I haven't had it checked with anybody more knowledgeable, and I now know that it's missing a couple of things that I've been meaning to put in here, but I think this is a good enough basis anyway. And this is what I call all the possible moves in Tibetan debate, as if it were like a game, right? And I'd be happy to share this too, but just to see if this helps and if there are any questions. Hold on a second. Okay, so it's almost like these are, as I think of it, why can't I move this around? It's like these are the rules, as it were, of Tibetan debate. So there are different rules for the challenger and for the defender, right? So to begin, the challenger says, the subject just as Manjushri debated, then you fling a random consequence or you ask a question. I've since learned that you don't ask a random question. If you have a question, you just fling a random consequence. That amounts to the same thing, right? So things the challenger may ask of the defender. Posit the definition of X, posit the divisions of X, posit an illustration of X. How do the two X and Y compare? And then this is more in the more advanced classes. I've never actually encountered this directly, but they say posit the meaning of the word or phrase X in the definition such and such. So, say take, the definition of impermanent is momentary. Posit the meaning of the word momentary in the definition of impermanent. Posit the meaning of the word or phrase X in the textual passage such and such. Posit the meaning of passage Y. So for example, take the subject, the passage that says form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Posit the meaning of that passage, right? There's really more that you can say. You can basically ask them to posit anything, I think, within reason, but these are the common ones. Now, after the defender has given any answer that wasn't already spelled out, the challenger is allowed to say, spell out your answer. So if the defender says, I accept, you can say, spell out your answer. And then the defender has to say, I accept that Snoopy is a mammal. Or I accept that whatever is a mammal is necessarily an animal. Or I accept that Snoopy is an animal because of being a mammal. Whatever they just accepted, they have to spell it out. Or if I say, take the subject Snoopy, it follows that it is an animal because of being a mammal, and the defender says there is no pervasion. You say, spell out your answer, and then they can say, it is not the case that whatever is a mammal is necessarily an animal, right? Anyway, I don't know. I'm afraid that this might make it more confusing. But after the defender asserts that A is B, so after the defender makes a statement of quality, it follows that the subject A is C because of being B. They've just accepted that A is B. It follows that the subject A is not B because it is C. Okay, let's try this. Suppose somebody says, suppose that I say, take the subject, oh, I don't know. I'm sorry. Take the subject Snoopy. It follows that it is a cat. Okay. And the person says, I accept. So now the defender has accepted that Snoopy is a cat. They've asserted that Snoopy is a cat. Okay. So I, as the challenger, have three options. I can either say, it follows that the subject Snoopy is a feline because of being a cat. Or instead, I can say, it follows the subject Snoopy is not a cat because of being a dog. Right? Or I can say the subject Snoopy is a cat because, and I can elicit the reason for the defender's point. You see? So it's interesting because I've never seen this spelled out in the way debate is taught. But in essence, even for the challenger, there is still a limited number of places in principle that you would go, right? After the defender asserts that whatever is A is necessarily B. So for example, take the subject Snoopy, it follows that it is an animal because of being a sentient being. No, let me change that. Take the subject Snoopy. Take the subject Snoopy. It follows that it is a dog because of being a sentient being. The person says, I accept. It follows that whatever is a sentient being is necessarily a dog. Let's say the person says, I accept. Right? So now I can say, it follows that the subject, Nick Cage, is a dog because of being a sentient being. Right? It's flinging a consequence at them. Or I can say, it follows that whatever is a sentient being is not necessarily a dog because there are cats that are sentient beings. Right? Or I can ask them for a reason. Whatever is essentially being is necessarily a dog because, you see what I'm saying? Well, I don't know. I think it might be too much to go through all of this, but I'm happy to share this if you guys think it's helpful. And the idea is that there are no rules for what the defender is and isn't allowed to say. This is just almost like a logical consequence of where the defender is trying to get. They'll probably say one of these things. You know, this is the strategy rather than the rules.
You
For the
mean
for the
challenger?
challenger,
Okay.
for the challenger, oh, advise me. Okay, yeah. Then there are exclamations after the defender contradicts something they had asserted before. You say sa. After the defender contradicts their thesis, you say sa, sa, sa. And then there are what I call warnings. You know, you can say blah, blah, blah. You have asserted the reason, or you have asserted the pervasion, or you have asserted both the reason and the pervasion, or the three spheres, which means you have asserted the reason, you have asserted the pervasion, and you have denied the thesis. So whatever you say next, it's going to get at sa. When the defender is taking a long time to answer, cheer, 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 means why. Now for the defender, it's even more clear cut, because for the defender, there are rules. So if you're given a two-part consequence, it's a simple consequence, that you can either say why or I accept it. If you're given a three-part consequence with a one-part reason, right? So a consequence with a reason, you can either say the reason is not established, there is no pervasion, or I accept that A is B. You can also say the pervasion is opposite. I didn't even get into that because you don't ever have to say that. But if you ever want to point out that not only is there no pervasion, but it's the reverse, you're allowed to say the pervasion is opposite, right? So that would be if I said, take the subject sound, it follows that it is permanent because it is produced. Well, the reason is established, sound is produced. There's no pervasion. It is not the case that whatever is produced is necessarily permanent. That's not true. So I could just say there's no pervasion. But if I want to, in fact, whatever is produced is necessarily not permanent. So I could even say the pervasion is opposite. I feel like you should start by saying, oi, the pervasion is opposite. Anyway, after a three-part consequence with a two-part reason, you can either say the first part of the reason is not established, the second part of the reason is not established, the combined reason is not established. That's a very, very rare, as you might recall, very specific one. That's basically if there's a verbal fault in the way that they put the sentence together. You can say there's no pervasion, the pervasion is opposite, or I accept that A is B. If you're asked to posit something, that there is something, the subject X. This is the answer that you'd give if you don't know, but then you kind of lose, basically, you know. These are the options, as you guys well know, for how to compare two phenomena. And there's that special answer, which really, I would now say doubt. Doubt, it just means you're asking me something that it's just absolutely impossible for somebody in my position to know the answer to. So there's nothing I can say about that. There's another special answer also that I've since learned, which is you have lost the subject, which is something that you would say if the challenger has lost track of what the subject was and they're just given reasons that don't connect back to the subject. Like if I said, you know, take the subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a mammal because dogs are mammal. Right? Subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a mammal because dogs are mammal. I can't even check whether the reason is established because I can't check dogs are mammal. What does Snoopy have to do with that? So say you've lost the subject. right? Basically, the reason has to have the word it in it somewhere, or they, you know.
That's really helpful because I think I have pieces of that all over my notes, but I haven't had much success constructing a list.
Sure, I'm happy to share it, especially the defender's part, because the defender's part is pretty prescribed, you know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Sheila.
So let's say with Snoopy, you say Snoopy is a dog, but let's say you're thinking of your Snoopy, and I'm thinking the comic strip Snoopy.
Right, right.
So they're both dogs, but they're really not mammals. They're both not mammals. I mean, how would you know kind of which object you're interested in?
Right. So first of all, ideally, you know, we would both be talking about the same thing in the first place. Now, it of course won't always happen that way, right? If I'm imagining something and you're imagining something else, just think about what would happen, right? So I would say, take the subject Snoopy. It follows that it is a mammal. This person's thinking of the cartoon. Why? It follows that it is a mammal because it is a dog. This person would say, the reason is not established. Right? That the cartoon is not a dog, it's drawings. Right? So the reason is not established. So then I would think, that's weird. You know, Snoopy is very evidently a dog. I wonder what the heck is going on with that, you know? So then I would say, it follows the subject Snoopy is not a dog. I accept. It is not a dog because, and then this person will say, because it is a character in a comic strip. And then I will say, and then from there, we'll be able to clarify. And then I'll be able to say, okay, then forget that. Take the subject, this Snoopy over here. And then we can have the debate that I meant to have all along. Right? A lot of the times, like at least, I don't know, informal debate or not, but like in informal conversations, a lot of the times that's what will happen. And when it does, like you should be thrilled. Because like in some cases, like, oh, we don't even disagree. We were just thinking of different things.
So can you also establish that before you start? I mean, you can say, okay, that's like Snoopy, my dog, or I can say Snoopy, the comic strip.
Exactly. So when you give the subject, when you posit the subject, you can be as specific as you like. And here, as we're doing this together, I've been trying my best to keep repeating the subject exactly as we had given it. But in practice, you don't need to do, like once it's established what the subject is, once everybody knows what we're talking about, then you don't need to keep spelling it out every time. You can just say the rest. You can just say, you know, the subject Snoopy, it follows that it is a dog. Why? Because it is a mammal. Why? Because it drank milk when it was a baby. You don't have to keep saying the subject, the subject, right? And furthermore, if you said, let's say you said, take the subject, a sentient being who has already encountered the Dharma, but who is still in the process of attaining the first path, even though in a previous eon they had already attained the first path and had since lost that realization. I don't thankfully need to keep saying that every time. Even if I want to refer back to it, I can say, take the subject, that sentient being. You know, again, as long as we're clear what we're talking about, that's the important thing as far as the subject is concerned.
Is such a thing?
As a sentient being had once attained the first path and has lost it, yes. Yes. Probably every sentient being, probably. What there isn't such a thing as is a sentient being who has attained the third path and has lost it. That's the path of seeing. That's when you can't lose it anymore.
I'm sorry, you weren't talking about the path of seeing initially?
No, the first path is the path of accumulation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, don't worry. Don't worry. If you've attained the path of seeing, you're safe. Okay,
I had
all
I had
right.
a question
Yes.
also about sort of the beginning. So the defender has this concept in their mind, right? And the challenger is challenging that to, either clarify it for the defender's sake or the challenger's sake as well, right?
It's
But
always for the defender's sake.
for the defender's sake.
It's always either it's well.
So yeah, I guess
I mean,
that was
it's not that the challenger still gets something out of it. So it's beneficial to everybody,
yeah.
but it's for the
So
for the
would it be
defender's sake.
best if the defender picks the starting thesis that the challenger takes up?
Right. And in practice, well, I guess it depends on the context, because you can use this for anything, right? So the way this is, one way that this is used in Tibet, let's call it, is that a class will study something, they'll study, what is an object of knowledge, and then there's a definition. What are the categories of the object of knowledge? There are two. There's functioning phenomena and or functioning things and impermanent phenomena. And what are the impermanent phenomena? There's three, there's this. They'll study that in class, they'll memorize the definitions and so forth. And then they'll go out into the courtyard. And then the challenger will, at that point, as I understand it, generally pick something as, basically we need to study this material. So let's study, Now, in other contexts, it actually, well, in my real life experience, it usually happens in the car when your spouse says something. And then in that context, they started it. They're the defender and they started it, And then basically you as the challenger, you'll officially start it but just by formalizing what they just said.
I see.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, for example, let's say, and my spouse, Nick, I don't think he would say this, but let's say that Nick said, well, I don't exist. We're having a conversation like, well, but I don't exist. Take the subject, you, it follows that it doesn't exist. I started it. I'm the challenger. I started it, but it's what he said, And furthermore, even if for some reason, if you're meeting, if you're meeting up to practice debate, right? And there isn't a pre-established theme, you can totally informally discuss it beforehand.
Yeah. But so the challenger has to have some idea of the thesis, whether it's correct or not, to engage, right? And then if it's incorrect, if it's the wrong view, will the defender ever let's say the defender has right view, or I tend to think of what if the defender was clairvoyant and the challenger was just sentient being, and then vice versa. And I feel like if the challenger was clairvoyant, maybe the defender will be clairvoyant if you go on long enough, right? But vice versa, it's not the case.
Right. So two things. One more for fun than anything else, but the rule is that if one person knows something through clairvoyance, but the other person proves something else through logic, the one who proved it through logic wins. Logic is more reliable than clairvoyance. There's a famous story about, I think, was it Asanga and Vasubandhu, I think, who were brothers. And if I'm not mistaken, Asanga had clairvoyance. I could be getting the people wrong, but I think it was Asanga had clairvoyance and Vasubandhu had the path of reasoning, as it's called. And Asanga saw, they both saw a pregnant cow. And Asanga, through clairvoyance, could see inside the cow and said the calf is going to be born. It's going to have a black spot on its forehead. And Vasubandhu said, when calves are in the womb, they're curled up with their tail over their face like this. So the calf is going to be born with a black spot on the end of its tail. you know? And as Sangha said, I see it. Sven said, I logically, when it was born, of course, had a black tip of the tail.
My fire alarm's going off. I'll be back.
Oh gosh, yes.
Or just the, hit the beeper. Yeah.
Yeah, please be careful. Take the subject in Trey's place. It follows that there is fire because there is a fire alarm going off. What would you say?
The reason is not established.
It's no pervasive.
Well, I didn't hear the fire alarm, but if we take Trey at his word, then I would say the reason is established, right? If we take Trey at his word, but there's no pervasion, right?
So say that, the statement again then.
Take the subject at Trey's place, where Trey is at. It follows that there is fire because there is a fire alarm going off.
See, I think that the alarm could go off because the battery's dead or something, right?
Exactly. So the reason is established. There is a fire alarm going off, but there's no pervasion. It's not true that just because there's a fire alarm going off, necessarily there's a fire. As
That's
my
probably
roommate, who used to make popcorn late at night, could very well attest.
Okay, all good.
Good. I'm glad.
I'm going to write that one down and think about it because I think that's where I get in trouble.
Yeah,
Thank you.
think about that. That's a good example. Think about that. Yeah. Okay. Let's break out into rooms. Just do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that means divided by 2 is 4. And let me just see if this works. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What? Like my math is always, I know it's always the same reason. Sheila, you're a host too, so you don't get a sign. Oh man.
I can unhost.
Or can you just join room 4?
You can try.
This always boggles my brain each time because I'm like, I'm counting. There's 8 of us. 8 is divisible by 2. Why is it that there's one person left over? And this is why.
Well, I'll just make you host. And
I'll
then
open the.
unhost. Wait. I'm going to- You have to unhost me. Yeah, I made you host, unhost me, and then you can.
Oh,
do
wait, I think I can do it now. I forgot to give you guys a prompt.
You intended to bring us
Yeah.
back?
I did intend to bring it back because I brilliantly forgot to give you guys a prompt. Sorry, guys. Oop. Oh, I just sent it all unformatted. I came up with like a bunch of different possible topics of debate. You guys can pick whatever one you like. So the subject time, it follows that it is beginningless. The subject, a sentient being, it follows that it can become enlightened without a teacher. Whatever is a human being necessarily has the opportunity to practice Dharma. Whatever is not a human being necessarily does not have the opportunity to practice Dharma. The subject, a mind stream, it follows that it continues after death. Whatever is a group of Buddhists who practice together necessarily is the Sangha jewel. How do the two compare? That which holds one back from long-term suffering beyond just one life, and Buddha Dharma. Posit the definition of karma. The subject life, it follows that everything in it is suffering. Okay, so for those who just joined, I apologize. That was my bad. I forgot to give you guys prompts. So I sent it, so you should have it in the chat, a bunch of different options. You can pick whichever one you like to
Copy it.
defend.
It's not
Copy it
there.
so that you'll have it with you in the breakout room and you can repost it in the chat.
Yeah, because I can't see it. Or we can't
See it in the
when we're
chat.
gone.
Yeah, just
Uh,
do it and take it with
you know what I'll do? I'll broadcast it also into the chat room. Okay, my apologies. Let me make this so that it doesn't close the room again. All right, take two. How's it coming along? Or rather, how did it go?
I mean, it was very useful for me as an example of seeing how something would go. I feel like I personally I got stumped quite a lot personally, I got stumped on how to get past where it seems like there's an agreement of terms quite early on, and also on just in general on like phrasing my position and trying to get my side of the debate in.
As the challenger.
Practice. Yeah, exactly. Like I just felt like I was asking lots of the wrong questions.
I see. Do you have an example that would be helpful to run through, or?
Well, if Cara doesn't mind, the last one we did was what was it? We did take the I tried to take the subject life. It follows that everything in it is suffering. To which was responded, why? To which I phrased the opposite, take the subject life. It follows that everything in it is not suffering. To which the response was, I accept. And then what did I say? Probably this is probably the point where I said something really stupid. I tried to say something like, what I wanted to oh no, I then said, take the subject life. It follows that everything in it is not suffering because, I can't remember what Clara, what you said at that point, but it was, this was the point at which I started to get lost. It was, anyway, I wanted to make, I wanted to make the position in the debate that suffering is all pervasive and that as a human being, you're constantly subject to all kinds of suffering, and therefore everything in it could be seen as a kind of suffering. But I ended up sort of just affirming the different ways in which it wouldn't necessarily be that way, rather than getting.
I see. Just for the sake of time, I think what I'll say is there's no one right way to do it. There's countless ways you could do it, but for what it's worth, one way would be to just be very direct about the whole thing and say, take the subject life. It follows that everything in it is suffering because everything in it is all pervasive conditioned suffering. And then see what Clara said about that. I don't know if that's the best way given where you guys are at, but just to put it out there that that is one way, and you can kind of deconstruct it. You can either kind of build up to something, or you can kind of, it's almost like sales tactics. There's foot in the door and there's door in the face, right? Foot in the door is like you start small and you build up from there. Door in the face, like you start with the big one, you get the door slammed on your face, then you kind of work your way down, right? Yeah. One thing, changing gears for a second, one thing that I had occasion to mention to one of the groups, so I just wanted to mention it to everybody because it might be helpful, is that if you're the challenger, if you're going down one line of questioning, there's no rule that says that you have to see it through. If you're going down one line of questioning and you're stumped, or you see, no, this isn't going to get me anywhere, or no, they make a good point about that, whatever, you can always just drop it and pick it up from wherever you want. It could be a brand new thing. It could be like a sub branch, whatever. As the challenger, you can go anywhere, right? Okay. I kind of peeked in, as you guys know, into each of the groups, and I saw like flow. I saw like conversations happening, and it was pretty cool. Any observations, questions, concerns, any places you guys did feel stumped? Yeah, Andrew?
I think for me, it feels almost like a hybrid is the best of both worlds, because I understand the very much, no, this is your response, this is the only way you can respond, and that structure. But certainly when I was doing that through with Brett, the ability to almost break out a character and go, no, we need to have a bit of more of a conversation about that. That to me felt like the best of both worlds, both like the Western approach as well as the Tibetan.
Yes, yes, yes. And my understanding is that like in informal debate, I don't know, there are very formal debates. Like for example, to get your Geshe degree, you have to be the defender, and all of these like great masters of debate will come in very publicly in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people and debate you on a topic. I don't know how that, what the rules are for that. But aside from that, yes, you do occasionally break out and say something informal. I just think it's a little bit like, well, like picking up any skill. In the beginning, I think it's actually better to be a little bit more strict, typically, you know, until we, like, I think I might have mentioned this, I forget, I mentioned this to somebody recently. In 11th grade, I had a teacher who used to, like, if somebody said, you know, like, you taught us that the rule is you must do this, an English teacher, you must do this, but here's this poet doing something else. She would say, well, he has poetic license. You don't have poetic license yet, you know? But use your good sense, you know, like if you feel like you're stuck, you're stumped, and if it does just say this will help. What you don't want to do is you don't want to accidentally, you know, kind of go off. You want to try to bring it back as quickly as possible to the debate format. Right? What else?
I found when both challenger and defender are kind of in agreement on the thesis from the beginning, it's sort of hard. I feel like during the debate, like as you're going down a branch or something, until you find a branch where like you disagree on, to me it doesn't seem to go as smooth. Whereas then once you hit a branch where like either of you realize you disagree on it, I don't know whether that's like, you know, samsaric being competitiveness, that all of a sudden it like starts becoming smoother. You know what I mean?
I totally know what you mean. There might be a little bit of that competitiveness in there perhaps, but I think there's more to it than just that. At least I think it's very natural, because if you disagree with something, then you can, usually you can say why you disagree with it. Like your course is clear, you know? If somebody said, you know, the square root of 49 is an even number, they say, no, it's not, because it's 7. Like, I know why I disagree, you know? Whereas if they said, you know, the square root of 49 is not an even number, I'm like, well, I agree with that. So how am I going to argue with you? It's harder.
Yeah, exactly. I guess that's like my issue with like prompts or like choosing the thesis. Like I feel like having that conversation in the beginning and choosing a thesis that you can both you know, have, you know, you can defend, right? Or you have your reasons, your angles, it goes a lot smoother. Yeah.
Totally. Just for what it's worth, like when you do want to, or kind of quote unquote, have to debate a point where you guys agree, one thing that can be helpful is to think back and say, was there ever a time when I didn't think this? You know, was there ever a time when I would have said something different? What would I have said then? What incorrect thing would I have said then? You know? Or is there anybody who doesn't agree with this in the world? The answer is yes, whatever you're debating. So what would they argue? What would their reasoning be?
Yeah, that's good.
Sheila?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, as a challenger, like you start out, you have a thesis and you sort of have an idea of where you want to go with it. Can you like switch that halfway through? Like, let's say the defender like points out something and then you realize that you're a mistake, and then can you just sort of switch directions and then go that way?
Right. So formally, no. Formally, you'd see it through to the end, and then you can have a different debate. Informally, yes, as long as you say, let's switch places then. Let me be the defender and you be the child. You have to stop and you have to say, let's do this now. And if you're both in agreement, it's a free world, you know, and it's a nice thing to do, I think. You know, and we're doing this over Zoom, but ideally, like if you were in person, the defender would be sitting down and the challenger would be standing up, right? So if you're going to do that, you'd switch places.
So what the challenge would say, wait a second, like, I don't want to do this anymore. I mean, I have a different idea. And then
in principle, there's no rule for what you would do because it's informal, you know, but it'd say, but like, you know, just as a human being, you could always say, hold on one sec. Do you guys do this in the UK? Do you know what this is? Yeah. Okay. Time out. Like 1 second. Could we switch places? Like, would you mind, like, you're asking them just as a favor, you know, just a friend, like, could you challenge me on this? Because I'm stumped, I'm confused, whatever. Sure. And then if they're agreeable, you're agreeable. But the one thing that's important is that you not just kind of devolve into that just in the middle of a debate, because then things get very confusing very quickly. That's all. You know, like if the challenger, if you're the challenger and you hear yourself saying the words, the reason is not established, something has gone horribly wrong. You know? Yeah. Any last thought or question before we close for today? Okay, I can tell you from direct observation that you guys are coming up, like you've come a long way. Like you guys are really starting to get it, you know, like again, sitting in on other groups, there's a huge difference from this time to last time. And there was a huge difference from last time to the time before. And if you're sitting there thinking like, oh my God, that doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So don't worry, we'll all get there at our own pace, but we're all moving forward. Linda?
It really helps to have that sort of that list of the topics you broadcast to us. And it also looks like we are not meeting next Sunday. Is that right?
Right.
But maybe we could informally, if any of us are interested.
I strongly encourage that. Yeah.
I'd like that because even a week feels like a long time.
Yes.
Enough for me to forget a lot.
Yes, definitely. I definitely encourage that. And of course, you know, and it's easy for me to say, but like, if anybody has the time and the inclination, even before then, you could also meet for a little bit and practice and review. I mean, yeah, nothing gets harder with practice. That's the Tibetan saying.
And with that, following up, thank you, Jana, who's been arranging all our practice sessions and matching this up with buddies. And it's really been really wonderful.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, Gus, can you send us those topics, those questions, and the instructions that that you showed us earlier?
The document that I shared. Yeah.
And those topics, because those are very good topics.
Okay. Oh, great. Good. Sure. I'm happy to send both, but that motivates me. That prompts me. I need to kind of update it then before I send it. I'll do that.
Yeah, I have the topics I could stick it in when I send the buddy list too.
Oh, thank you.
Don't try to make it perfect.
If you want to make it perfect, resend it, then make it perfect and resend it.
No.
10 minutes.
That's very good advice.
And also, all of you, next week, the reason we're not meeting is because Kundrila, who is the state oracle for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is going to be at our center. So we're all like focused on.
It's very, very exciting.
So if you want to join us, it's also on Zoom. It's in-house. She's in-house, but we're also doing it on Zoom. So if you're interested, check the website. There's a morning session and an afternoon session.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Excited.
Lama Zopa Rinpoche had astonishing things to say about her, like about how high a being she is. Even some stories that he shared. It's really astonishing. And
Linda, she's somebody who's not educated and is very evolved.
Right. right? Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can't recall personally in my lived experience ever hearing such things said about a living person. I can't recall.
Oh.
So sounds like a very special meeting. Okay. So let's dedicate all the positive potential that we've created from everything that we've done in the last couple of hours together. And we can recognize that each of these things has an impact on the mind. And so we think, may that impact move the mind only in directions that will lead us to compassion, to loving kindness, to wanting to take on the responsibility to help each other, to develop bodhicitta, to want to become a Buddha in order to bring all beings to enlightenment, and to develop wisdom, understanding, clarity, skillful means, so that we can accomplish that goal of bringing all beings to enlightenment as quickly as possible. And then if you feel a connection to Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or if you just like to join, either way, we can also think, may all these positive potentials also move us in ways that we create the conditions for Lama Zopa Rinpoche to return to us as quickly as possible, for us to recognize that return as quickly as possible, and for all beings to be able to benefit infinitely, as much as possible, from that continuation of the manifestation. And we can also dedicate the way Lama Zopa Rinpoche would always advise. We can think, due to the 3-time merits accumulated by myself, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and all universal sentient beings, which definitely exist, but which are completely empty of inherently existing from their own side. May I, who definitely exist, but who am completely empty of inherently existing from my own side, quickly attain the state of perfect enlightenment, which definitely exists, but which is completely empty of inherently existing from its own side, in order to bring all universal sentient beings who definitely exist, but who are completely empty of inherently existing from their own side, to that enlightened state which definitely exists, but which is completely empty of inherently existing from its own side. May I do that by myself alone, which definitely exists, which is completely empty of inherently existing from its own side.
Hmm.
Thank you so much. And for those that I don't see next week, I hope you have a great couple of weeks, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Right?
Hmm.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes.
There.
Thank you. Bye.